Eventually, maybe you'll actually say when the teacher says Christopher Columbus discovered America and he met those Indians here. There were no Indians here when Christopher Columbus got here. There were people from Africa who had been here for over 10,000 years before Christopher Columbus was born. It's time for us to teach our children the truth.
What if the ocean was never a wall? What if, long before any map was drawn, there were people who looked at that same endless horizon and chose to sail toward it? The world has been told one version of who first reached the Americas, but scattered across ancient ruins, old colonial journals, and stone monuments older than any European nation, there are details that version has never fully explained. This is not a story about conspiracy. It is a story about questions. And some of the most important questions in history are the ones we were never encouraged to ask. Most of us learned the same story. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west from Spain with 3 ships. He landed in the Caribbean in October of that year, believing he had found a new route to Asia. What followed was centuries of European colonization, and with it, the forced movement of millions of Africans to the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade. Inside that story, the history of African people in the Americas has one starting point: the slave ship, one role, the enslaved, one arrival, in chains. That is the version most of the world inherited, and for a long time, it was rarely questioned. But a separate body of research, growing for more than 50 years, asked something different. What if Africans came to the Americas not as captives, but as explorers?
Okay, Christopher Columbus did not discover America. Exactly. I mean, never mind the question of like how you can discover a place where the inhabitants are watching you arrive from the shore. Yeah, they weren't wearing pants. Is that what somebody said? I like that.
To understand why some researchers take this question seriously, start with the ocean itself. The Atlantic is not just open water. It is a system of powerful natural currents. The north and south equatorial currents both flow westward from the coast of West Africa directly toward the Caribbean and South America. Some maritime historians believe that a strong, well-built vessel departing the right point on the African coast could be carried across the Atlantic by these currents alone. This is not just theory. In 1969, explorer Thor Heyerdahl built a reed boat using ancient Egyptian designs and crossed the Atlantic from Morocco to near the Caribbean. His purpose was simple: to show it could be done. And some researchers argue that certain African civilizations had both the skill and the reason to try, long before Columbus. But here's where things get interesting. The most well-documented story of an African Atlantic expedition involves the Mali Empire, a West African state that, in the early 14th century, was one of the most powerful empires on Earth. It controlled vast gold and salt trade routes across the Sahara. Its wealth was so great that when its most famous ruler, Mansa Musa, made a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he distributed so much gold along the way that he reportedly caused inflation in Egypt. But the story that matters here involves his predecessor, a king known as Abu Bakr II. The account comes from a recorded conversation between Mansa Musa and a respected Arab scholar named Al-Umari. Mansa Musa explained how he came to the throne. His predecessor, he said, became obsessed with one question: what lies on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean? Abu Bakr II sent a fleet of 200 ships westward with instructions not to return until they reached the far side or ran out of supplies. Only one ship came back. Its captain described the other vessels being pulled into a powerful current they could not escape. Some researchers believe this is a precise description of the Atlantic equatorial current. Rather than stopping there, Abu Bakr prepared a second expedition, this time with 2,000 ships, 1,000 for men and 1,000 for supplies. He gave up his throne, passed power to Mansa Musa, and sailed west into the Atlantic. He was never seen again. Mainstream historians are divided. Some call the account exaggerated. Others point out that it was not a legend passed down through generations. It was recorded by a contemporary scholar who spoke directly with the man who witnessed it. That difference, they argue, matters. What it establishes at minimum is this: a West African king in the 1300s had the ambition, the ships, and the wealth to attempt a crossing of the Atlantic. Columbus, more than a century later, crossed with 3 ships and about 90 men. Now pause for a second, because separate from written history, there is physical evidence carved in stone, and it has been standing for over 3,000 years. The Olmec civilization lived along the Gulf Coast of present-day Mexico between roughly 1500 and 400 BC. They are considered the oldest major civilization in Mesoamerica, the culture that laid the groundwork for the Maya and the Aztec. Among their most famous creations are 17 colossal stone heads, some nearly 10 feet tall and weighing up to 40 tons. These are not abstract carvings. They are individual portraits, detailed, realistic human faces. And a number of researchers, most notably historian Ivan van Sertima, in his 1976 book, They Came Before Columbus, have argued that the facial features on several of these heads, the broad nose, the full lips, the rounded face structure, resemble those of West African people, not the indigenous populations of the region. Van Sertima also pointed to helmets on some of the heads that he compared to those worn by ancient Nubian soldiers, and to other Olmec figurines and pottery that he believed showed similar African features. When you look at the Olmec heads, and we encourage you to search them after this video, what do you see? Drop your honest answer in the comments. This is a conversation worth having.
What is the main idea in your book, They Came Before Columbus?
The main idea in my book is to show that early America before the coming of Columbus, was a far more complex society than people imagined, and that it involved Africans. Africans came in here. They came in on several occasions. Sometimes these were accidents, sometimes they were on purpose, and that they had an influence, an actual impact and influence upon the formation of certain American civilizations.
When we say pre-Columbus period, what are we talking about?
We're talking about long before 1492. It is absurd, and only fools can still believe that Columbus discovered the Americas in 1492. In fact, Columbus never even came to this continent. Columbus wandered about in the Caribbean islands, just on the very edge of the great civilizations.
And then there is the record left by Columbus himself. In his journals, Columbus wrote that the native Taino people of Hispaniola told him of dark-skinned visitors who had come by sea and traded in gold-tipped spears. Columbus collected samples of those spearheads and sent them to Spain for testing. The results showed that the gold alloy, called guanine by the Taino, matched the composition of alloys being made in West Africa at the time. The same word, guanine, was also used in West Africa to describe the same material. That is a metallurgical match, a geographic connection, and a linguistic parallel recorded in Columbus's own documentation before the slave trade had brought any Africans to the region. Being honest about this topic means taking the counter-arguments seriously. The mainstream archaeological community has not accepted the theory of pre-Columbian African contact, and their reasons are real. On the Olmec heads, most Mesoamerican scholars say the facial features are consistent with the range of physical appearances found among ancient Gulf Coast populations. Broad noses and full lips appear in many human populations around the world and cannot on their own confirm African ancestry. The interpretation, critics say, relies on how the stone looks to the eye, not on biological data. No skeletal remains with confirmed African DNA have been recovered from any verified pre-Columbian site. No tools, fabrics, or objects of confirmed West African origin have been found in any Olmec excavation. In archaeology, Missing physical evidence is not a small problem, it is a central one. But here is the other side of that argument. The account of Abu Bakr, while recorded by a contemporary scholar, remains a single written source with no matching physical evidence found in the Americas. Historians who study this period generally treat it as historically interesting but unverifiable. The Columbus metallurgical account is also disputed. Some scholars note the original analysis was never independently repeated. The shared word guanin between West Africa and the Caribbean may reflect a shared trading vocabulary that spread through Atlantic island networks, not direct transatlantic contact. This is the pattern at the center of this entire debate. The data points are real. The interpretations are strongly contested. There's also a broader criticism worth acknowledging. Some historians argue that parts of this research have been driven more by the desire to recover African historical pride, a completely understandable goal, than by the strength of the evidence. That is a fair challenge. Evidence does not bend to need, no matter how just that need may be. But here's what history has also taught us. The official version has been wrong before. For decades, mainstream scholarship held that no pre-Columbian transatlantic contact had occurred at all. Then in the 1960s, physical excavation at L'Anse aux Meadows in Canada confirmed that Norse explorers had reached North America around 1000 CE, 5 centuries before Columbus. The timeline was revised, not by a small margin, by 500 years. That does not prove African contact happened, but it shows the accepted version of pre-Columbian history has been revised before through evidence, persistence, and open inquiry. So why does this debate matter beyond the details of any single artifact? Because history is never just a collection of facts. It is a story someone chose to tell, and a story someone else chose to leave out. The dominant narrative about African people in the Americas was built during a specific period to serve a specific purpose. The ideology that supported slavery required a particular story, one that framed Africans as a people without history, without exploration, without civilization building on their own terms. That story was not an accident. It was useful. Recognizing that framing does not mean every alternative theory is correct. It means that when we evaluate historical evidence, the environment in which that evaluation happens matters. What gets researched, what gets funded, what gets published, and what gets dismissed, none of that is neutral. Ivan van Sertima was not alone in this work. Historians, anthropologists, and linguists across several countries have continued building on these questions, pointing to language similarities between West African and Mesoamerican language families, shared agricultural practices like ceremonial mound building found in both regions, and trace evidence in ancient human remains that does not fit standard migration models. Individually, each piece of evidence can be explained another way, but the full picture, spread across disciplines, across continents, across centuries of documentation, raises a cumulative question that a simple dismissal struggles to absorb. And beyond the academic, this question carries a different kind of weight. For communities whose history was stripped away, first by slavery, then by the erasure of what came before it, the possibility that their ancestors were navigators and explorers is not just a historical correction. It is a restoration of something that was deliberately taken. The Olmec heads are still standing. The account of Abu Bakr II, a king who gave up his throne to sail into the unknown, still exists in the historical record. The metallurgical findings in Columbus's own journal still exist. The questions they raise have not gone away. We know the history of human movement across this planet is older and more complex than any one era's textbooks have been able to capture. We have been wrong before about who arrived first. We have revised the timeline before. That process, slow, careful, driven by evidence, is not a threat to history. It is how history works. So here's the question to carry with you. If the ocean was already a road and someone was already sailing it, whose footprints are we still waiting to find? If this raised questions you want to keep exploring, subscribe, because uncovering this kind of history is exactly what this channel is here to do. Hit like if you believe the full story of African history deserves to be told, and drop a comment below with the one thing from this video that stayed with you. The conversation does not end here. It starts here.